Have you ever given everything to someone you trusted and they used it against you? What would you have done in her place? Write your thoughts in the comments. Now, let me tell you what happened when I sold my car for $13,000. When Eric asked if I could sell my car, I didn't hesitate. I thought marriage was about trust, about saying yes, even when you were scared. So I sold the little blue Corolla that had carried me through college and scraped together every cent I had, $13,000. I handed it over without a contract, without a second thought, and when everything fell apart, when the bank letters came and the truth spilled into the cold kitchen air, I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I just said, okay. Turns out that one quiet word cost him more than he could afford. There was a time when everything about our life felt almost right. The mornings were slow and golden. The smell of burnt toast, the click of Eric's lighter as he tried to fix the old coffee machine again. I used to sit at our tiny kitchen table, legs tucked under me, working on invoices while he shuffled around, muttering about grounds and filters. Our apartment was too small, the walls too thin, the floor creaked under every step, but it was ours. It was home. I used to believe that love was built in these ordinary moments. Not grand gestures, not fireworks, but the quiet repetition of caring acts. That's why I never questioned the small things that started slipping. I thought marriages, weathered seasons, hot summers of passion, dry autumns of silence, and maybe long, cold winters. I wasn't naive enough to expect constant sunshine. I thought I was wise. Eric had a way of making me laugh even when I didn't want to. He'd mess up a recipe and pretend it was a gourmet disaster. He'd leave silly notes in my planner. Today, conquer the world after coffee. For a long time, I let those scraps of affection patch over the things we didn't talk about, like how he kept changing jobs or how he always had just one more big idea. He called them ventures. I called them dreams because that's what they felt like. Untouchable, misty. A food truck, a t-shirt line, a YouTube channel about home repairs. None of them lasted more than a few months. I smiled through each new plan, tucked the bank statements deeper into the drawer, and told myself that belief was part of love, that patience was part of marriage. Still, I stayed careful. The savings account was under both our names, but mostly funded by my bonuses, my side work, my careful budgeting. The car, my little blue Corolla, was mine alone, bought the year after we married when I picked up freelance gigs alongside my full-time job. I loved that car more than I probably should have. It felt like independence with a steering wheel. We weren't rich, but we were surviving. Rent was steady, groceries were manageable, bills got paid, even if sometimes at the last minute. And in the spaces between the stress, there was laughter. There were slow Sundays with bad movies, nights when we stayed up too late talking about nothing, moments when he'd pull me close just because. I clung to those moments, built a whole world out of them. I didn't notice when the cracks first appeared. Maybe it was when Eric started leaving his coffee untouched in the mornings, too distracted by his phone. Maybe it was when he stopped asking me to proofread his emails before sending them. Maybe it was when his hugs grew quicker, one-armed, distracted. At the time, it felt like a shift in weather, a cold breeze through an open window I forgot to close. Uncomfortable, but temporary. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to be that wife, the nagging, suspicious one. I thought giving space was another word for love. I thought if I just stayed steady enough, cheerful enough, everything would circle back. So I focused on the good things. The way he still kissed me on the forehead when he left for work. The way he still warmed up the couch for our Friday night movie marathons, even if he fell asleep halfway through. And when he came to me, one Saturday afternoon, his voice strained but soft, asking if I could sell the car so he could fix everything, I didn't hesitate. I didn't even ask what needed fixing. We sat across from each other at that little kitchen table. He was wringing his hands, a nervous tic I hadn't seen since college. His eyes, the same hazel eyes that once made promises under cheap string lights at a county fair, wouldn't quite meet mine. He said it wasn't a big deal, just a bump. Something small he could handle, if he could just get the money together quickly. I remember tracing the grain of the table with my fingertip. I remember thinking about the Corolla, how I loved the independence it symbolized. And then I remember letting it go, like dropping a stone into deep water, watching it vanish. I agreed. Without conditions, without paperwork, without suspicion. Because that's what love is, right? Trust without weighing the cost. At least, that's what I thought back then. I would learn, soon enough, that trust without boundaries is not love. It's surrender. And I had just surrendered more than I knew. The dealership gave me less than I hoped for. $13,000, clean, counted, and quietly heartbreaking. I stood in the parking lot after signing the papers, staring at the empty space where my Corolla had always been. It felt like something had been amputated. Not in pain, just absence. A dull, low echo of what used to be mine. I wired the money that evening. Eric wasn't home. He texted, said he was out handling things. No details. Just 3 words and a thumbs up emoji. I made pasta, ate alone, folded laundry. And when he came back close to midnight, smelling faintly of whiskey and cold air, I didn't ask a single question. I told myself he looked tired, not guilty. It's incredible what the heart is willing to edit out in order to feel safe. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon. Eric was in the kitchen, grinning like nothing had happened. He had music playing, something jazzy, and he handed me a mug of coffee with a little bow drawn on the side in Sharpie. "You're amazing," he said, kissing my cheek. "Seriously, I've got this now. Just needed a boost, you'll see." I wanted to believe him, so I did. For a while, things felt almost normal again. He was around more. He made dinner twice that week, even though one meal was an overcooked steak and a half-burned pie. He was present. Not entirely, not all the time, but enough to make me wonder if maybe the worst was behind us. And then, little by little, the light began to shift. The savings account stayed empty. That was the first thing. He told me he'd return the money soon. Said he was restructuring something with his latest project. When I asked what kind of project, he brushed it off. "Better you don't get into it," he said. "It's temporary anyway." Then came the mail. Envelopes I wasn't supposed to see. I noticed them by accident. A letter from a bank I didn't recognize, folded tightly in his jacket pocket. I didn't open it. I just stared at the return address for 10 minutes while my tea went cold. He had never hidden things before. Or maybe he had, and I had never looked. I told myself not to be dramatic. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I'd ask tomorrow, when he was in a better mood. But the days passed, and every time I reached for clarity, he reached for charm. He started picking fights over small things. Why didn't I refill the Brita? Why was I working late again? Did I always have to be so controlling about the grocery list? I thought we were partners. But something in his voice had shifted, from we to you, from let's figure this out to you're always on my back. I tried to soothe it, to soften whatever sharp edge he was walking on. I bought his favorite beer, cleaned the apartment top to bottom, left notes in his wallet that said, "I believe in you." Because I did. I think I still did. But the man who smiled at those notes wasn't smiling anymore. He began disappearing on weekends, said he had meetings, pitches, that this time it was big. He used words like investment, capital, backers, but there were no contracts, no emails, no evidence, just his voice, excited and vague. I asked gently one night if he could walk me through the plan. He laughed, not kindly, not cruelly either, but distant, like I had said something naive. "Don't worry about it," he said. "You always want to spreadsheet everything to death. Just let me do this." I nodded, but something cracked quietly inside me, a thin hairline fracture behind the ribs. Not enough to break, but enough to hurt when I breathed too deep. Then came the overdraft notice. It was for the joint account, $137.52 overdrawn. I stared at the red text on the screen, blinking. The last time I checked, there had been almost $800 left. I scrolled through the transaction history. 4 ATM withdrawals in 3 days. A $92 charge at a bar downtown. Another $200 gone to something labeled Cash App, personal. I sat in the silence of the apartment, the laptop screen glowing soft blue in the dark. Eric was out again. "Another meeting," he said. I didn't cry. I didn't even call. I just closed the browser and sat there for a long time, trying to remember when I last felt like this was my home. And that's when it hit me. I had stopped being his partner. I had become his investor. The only difference was I never signed the contract. I told myself for a little while longer that maybe I was imagining things, that stress makes people act strange, that marriages survive worse. But truth is like water against stone. steady, relentless. It doesn't need permission to carve out the cracks. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything tipped. I came home early from work, a rare half day granted after finishing a quarterly report ahead of schedule. I remember humming to myself as I climbed the stairs, a grocery bag swinging from my arm, imagining us making dinner together, maybe finally talking. The apartment door was unlocked. At first, I thought nothing of it. Eric was probably just inside, maybe juggling something in his arms, too distracted to twist the deadbolt. But as I pushed the door open, I heard it. Laughter. Two voices. Not the TV, not a podcast. Human, live, and close. I froze, half inside the doorway, the grocery bag slipping slowly down my arm. Eric was sitting on the couch, leaned back, one arm draped casually over the shoulders of a woman I had never seen before. She was beautiful in the way magazines promised, long-legged, polished, the kind of effortless cool that made me instantly aware of every crease in my work blouse. There were two open beers on the coffee table. Eric said something low in her ear. She giggled, flipping her hair. Neither of them noticed me standing there. Or if they did, they didn't care. It's strange, the way a moment like that doesn't break you all at once. Instead, it freezes everything. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't tremble. I just stood very still, like I might become invisible if I tried hard enough. Finally, Eric glanced up, saw me. And then, the worst part, he didn't even look surprised. Annoyed, maybe. Inconvenienced. He stood slowly, rubbing his hands down his jeans. The woman shifted, her eyes flickering between us, a small smirk playing on her lips. "This isn't what it looks like," Eric said, his voice flat. The words were so ridiculous I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I set the grocery bag gently on the floor. A loaf of bread rolled out, bumping against my shoe. "I see," I said, and my voice sounded strange. Too calm, too even. Eric walked toward me, palms up like I was a wild animal he was trying not to spook. "I was going to tell you," he said. "I just didn't know how." The woman behind him, she didn't bother pretending. She picked up her beer and sipped it, watching us like a bored spectator. "How long?" I asked. He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I had my answer. "Since before you sold the car?" I pressed, my voice sharper now, slicing through the heavy air. He dropped his eyes. I nodded once, the way you might nod at a stranger giving you bad news. "It's not what you think," he tried again. "It's complicated." Of course it was. Isn't it always? I didn't ask her name. I didn't ask where they met, or how long he had been lying, or what promises he had whispered that made her sit there so comfortably in a home that wasn't hers. None of it mattered. Because what mattered, what had been made achingly, blindingly clear, was that Eric had chosen, not just once, not just in some drunken moment of weakness, but over and over again. He had chosen her. He had chosen lies. He had chosen a life where I was nothing more than a backup plan, a steady paycheck, a forgiving smile, a soft place to land when the world turned rough. And I had let him. I picked up the bread from the floor, placed it carefully back into the bag. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't ask for explanations he wasn't brave enough to give. I just said, "You'll be out by Sunday." He opened his mouth to argue, but something in my face must have stopped him, because he shut it again, tight, angry. The woman stood finally, smoothing her skirt. "I guess I'll see you around," she said lightly, tossing her hair as she walked past me, as if we were casual acquaintances, as if she hadn't just detonated what was left of my life. The door clicked shut behind her. Eric stayed where he was, shifting from foot to foot. "I'm sorry," he said finally, but the words hung there, empty, like smoke that wouldn't dissipate. I nodded again, too tired to offer anything more. He left that night, taking only a duffel bag and a look of wounded pride. The apartment felt cavernous without him, too much space, too much silence. I slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of 1,000 unsaid things settle on my chest. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I realized that love wasn't supposed to feel like this, like standing in a burning house and calling it home. And somewhere even deeper, in the part of me I had stopped listening to, a small, steady voice whispered, "This isn't the end of your story. It's the start." I didn't call anyone the next day. Not my sister, not my best friend from college, not even my mother, who would have probably said, "I told you he was too charming to be stable," with a sigh that would echo for weeks. I couldn't bear the retelling, couldn't bear the sound of my own voice putting words to what had just happened. So I stayed quiet. Eric's toothbrush was still in the bathroom, his hoodie still draped over the chair. His scent, cedarwood and something faintly metallic, lingered on the pillow. I washed the sheets 3 times, but it didn't come out. It was in the walls, the carpet, the silence. I moved through the apartment like someone visiting a place they used to live. Every corner held a memory I didn't ask for. The spot where we spilled wine and laughed until we cried. The chipped tile he promised he'd fix. The tiny scratch on the wall where we tried to hang a mirror and failed. I avoided the couch, the one where she'd sat. Instead, I took my meals, when I could eat, at the kitchen counter. Toast, tea, sometimes nothing at all. I lost weight without trying. I slept at odd hours, woke with a start at the sound of every engine outside, every knock too close to the door. When Sunday came, I half expected him not to leave, expected some scene, some plea, some attempt at reconciliation wrapped in half-meant apologies. But he didn't fight. He packed with his jaw tight and eyes averted, saying nothing. He took the big TV, the framed poster we got at the jazz festival in Nashville, the blender, the one I'd bought. I let him, because by then I was too hollow to care. The apartment felt skeletal, not empty, just stripped, like someone had taken a house and peeled the soul out of it. For the first time in years, I realized how quiet my own life was. Not peaceful, not serene, just unaccompanied. I had built a rhythm around someone else's footsteps, and without them, everything echoed. I returned to work Monday morning like nothing had happened. I smiled in meetings, sent polished emails, balanced budgets, and reconciled numbers. People said I looked focused. What they meant was blank. I didn't tell anyone, because there's a kind of grief that's too private for sharing. Not dramatic enough for sympathy, not shocking enough for gossip. Just the long, slow unraveling of a life you thought was real. The savings account stayed empty. I stopped checking it. The groceries dwindled. I lived off dry cereal and office coffee. And in the quietest hours, I questioned everything. Had I been blind, naive, desperate, or just loyal? It's a dangerous thing, the way women are taught to stay, to be soft, understanding, patient, to believe that love means endurance, no matter the weight. I had endured, but I wasn't sure what for anymore. Some nights, I walked aimlessly around the block just to avoid the apartment. I'd watch other windows glowing warm with dinner and conversation, with shadows moving behind drawn curtains. It felt like another planet. I didn't cry often. Tears came in small, surprising moments, while brushing my teeth, or folding socks, or hearing a song that once played in his car. Never in the dramatic way I used to imagine heartbreak. Just silent, sharp, over quickly. And yet, somewhere in all of it, something strange happened. The absence, unbearable at first, began to shift, not into comfort, but into clarity. I could hear my own thoughts again. I could feel my own shape in the room, no longer molded around someone else's presence. The apartment was still wrecked, emotionally, physically, but it was mine. One night, I lit a candle in the kitchen, a small act, but it burned like a lighthouse. I cleaned the counter, wiped down the stove, washed every dish one by one like I was touching the edges of myself again. I made a list of bills, looked at the numbers I'd been avoiding. The wreckage was worse than I thought. Credit card balances, auto-pay withdrawals I hadn't caught, a missed rent transfer. But for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt control. Not because I knew what would come next, but because I finally understood what I wouldn't allow again. There was no single moment when things got better. No epiphany, no grand sunrise scene, no triumphant music swelling in the background. It was slower than that. Quieter. I started by changing the sheets. Not because I believed that would fix anything, but because they smelled like him. 3 washes hadn't helped. New ones did. Then I cleared out the closet. Not just his things, those were mostly gone already, but mine too. Clothes that didn't feel like me anymore. Shoes I'd worn to dinners where I laughed too hard at jokes that weren't funny. A dress I kept just in case he ever took me dancing again. I folded it, then let it go. The apartment still felt like a shell, but now it was a shell I could touch without flinching. I rearranged the furniture, moved the couch, put the table near the window where the light came in better. I bought a plant. It died within a week, but still, I liked the idea of it. Money was tight, tighter than it had been in years. I cut every subscription, every takeout indulgence, every casual purchase. Made lists, tracked groceries to the cent. I went to the laundromat instead of using the building machines because I could sit there with a book and feel surrounded by the quiet movement of other people's lives. I told no one what had happened, not out of shame, but because the story felt private now, something that no longer needed to be explained or validated. Some wounds are better stitched closed without commentary. The quiet became a kind of rhythm. Not loneliness, exactly, just space. A life with fewer distractions. I read more, wrote in the margins of library books, took long walks with no direction. Once I passed a parked Corolla, same color, same year as mine. I paused, hand on my bag, eyes locked on the familiar curve of its frame. It hurt, unexpectedly. Not because I missed the car, but because I missed who I was when I had it. The version of me who believed love meant unquestioned giving. That version was gone now. Not dead. Just shed. Like an old skin. I started tracking down what Eric had left behind. Unpaid bills, strange charges, overlapping accounts I hadn't noticed while trying to survive. There was a payment due for something listed under both our names. The apartment lease, renewed without my knowledge 2 months before he left. That made me pause. I pulled the lease from my file drawer. There it was. Both signatures. Mine and his forged version of mine. It wasn't a perfect match. Just close enough. The landlord hadn't noticed. Neither had I. I sat with that for a long time. He hadn't just lied. He'd quietly decided things in my name, altered the lines of my life without asking. It wasn't enough to undo everything, legally, but it was enough to remind me. I had to untangle every knot now. Not with anger, but with precision. I reached out to a lawyer a friend once recommended, just to ask questions. He was kind, clear, efficient. Told me what my options were, what my rights were. The lease could be restructured, the financial history documented. The damage wasn't irreversible, but it would take time. That night, I poured myself a glass of water and sat by the window. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel strong. But I felt real. Not someone's wife, not someone's fallback. Just a woman, sitting in her own life, breathing in her own air. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to apologize for taking up space. Spring came slowly that year. It arrived in hesitant mornings. Pale light through the blinds, the air still cold enough to bite. But something about it felt softer. Or maybe I had changed, and the seasons simply met me where I was. I didn't mark a day on the calendar, didn't declare I'm healed. There was no ceremony, but I noticed small things. The way I laughed again, fully, at something on the radio. How I caught my reflection and didn't flinch at the tiredness under my eyes. How I began buying fruit again. Not out of obligation, but because I wanted sweetness in the house. Eric called once. I let it ring. Then again a few weeks later. This time I picked up, not because I wanted to hear his voice, but because I was no longer afraid of it. He asked if we could meet, said he wanted to talk things through. I asked what things. He said the apartment. Apparently, he'd learned the lease had been restructured, his name removed, my credit repaired. He sounded almost offended. I thought we could settle it together, he said. I already have, I told him, and that was that. He waited a beat, then said, You always were good at numbers. I didn't respond. He sighed, and when he spoke again, his voice had softened into something almost familiar. Look, I messed up. I know that. I was in a bad place. I know, I said quietly, and I did. But knowing didn't mean keeping the door open. I'm just trying to figure things out, he added. Could really use a place to land right now. There it was, the old pattern. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't begging, just reaching. Once I would have let that be enough. Once I would have opened the door a crack and told myself it was kindness. But now I understood that keeping the door closed wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. I hope you find what you need, I said. And then, before he could reply, I hung up. Not with anger, not with triumph, just stillness. I turned off the phone and left it on the kitchen table. Outside, the first tree on the block had bloomed. Tiny, stubborn blossoms. Not showy, not dramatic, but alive. I stepped outside for the first time in a week without my coat. Walked down the street past the coffee shop we used to visit, ordered tea, sat by the window, watched strangers pass with grocery bags, backpacks, briefcases. No one knew my story. No one owed me understanding, and I didn't need it. Healing had not made me louder. It had made me quieter, more deliberate, less eager to explain myself. A few months later, I sold the couch, painted the walls a soft green, hung a print of the ocean above the table. I didn't move. I stayed in the apartment, not because I couldn't afford to leave, but because I no longer wanted to run. This place, once filled with echoes of someone else, now sounded only like me. Some nights, I still felt the old ache. Loss doesn't vanish, it just stops leading the conversation. But in its place, something else had settled. A steadiness, not happiness, not yet, but peace. And in that peace, I found something worth more than any apology, any returned call, any shared space. I found the silence where I could finally hear myself again. And I didn't mind the sound.